You want the fingerboard, the string, and the bow to all be going in the same direction. Otherwise, you end up with interference.
Welcome to another episode of Contrabass Conversations, your show covering life on the low end of the spectrum. I'm your host, Jason Heath, and I'm so glad to have you here as we ramp up to the 2017 International Society of Bassists Convention, the 50th anniversary convention. That's what we're covering this week, and that's what we'll be covering the next several episodes. Today, we sit down with luthier Joey Naeger, who just wrote a fascinating article on fingerboard geometry. And you heard that quote at the beginning of this episode. That's just a little teaser about what we talk about with Joey. Now, we've got a link to that article, which is on his website. And if you're an ISB member, and you should be an ISB member, if you're not, you have probably already gotten that in the mail. So you can break out that article. And part of what I love about doing these podcasts is, for example, talking with Joey about an article and kind of digging deeper and getting it out in audio form. So if you're running or doing the dishes or whatever it is you do as you listen to these podcasts, you can dig into these interesting concepts. Now, before we get rolling here with Joey, I'd like to thank D'Addario Strings, who's going to be at ISB. I can't wait to hang out with them in person. And I want to let you know about our giveaway for 10 sets of Kaplan strings. That's what's on my bass right now. I'm loving them. They got great bow response, great pizzicato response, nice, beautiful balance. And you can enter that giveaway at contrabassconversations.com/strings. I'd also like to thank the Bass Violin Shop of Greensboro, North Carolina. They offer the Southeast's largest inventory of basses. That's laminate basses, hybrid basses, and carved double basses. So whether you're in search of the best entry-level laminate bass or you're looking for a fine pedigree instrument, there's always a unique selection ready for you to try. You can check them out at bassviolinshop.com, and trade-ins and consignments are welcome. And I'd like to thank Rosin Saver, which is a revolutionary storage device that keeps your bass rosin feeling as fresh as the day it was made. My Pops has been in my Rosin Saver for months now, and it's like it's brand new. This thing works. It's excellent. It's used by members of the New York Philharmonic, Toronto Symphony, Cleveland Orchestra, Royal Concertgebouw Orchestra, and many others. So go to rosinsaver.com, enter the promo code HEATH, that's HEATH, at checkout, and you get 10% off any and all orders. All right, we're going to dig into our conversation with Joey Naeger here. And again, check out the link in the show notes so you can follow along with this article. It's great timing. I'm reading this article, and I just had my fingerboard set up for like the first time in years. I took it to Gael McKeon here in the Bay Area, and I had like G string buzzing, E string buzzing, D and A strings a little too high, things you can probably relate to. And it was interesting just like talking through fingerboards and that sort of stuff. And I love, and I know almost nothing, right? So I thought it'd be interesting just, and probably a lot of people that listen to this are in the same boat. So like maybe we could just like define a couple terms. Like I struggle so hard to describe like what scoop is to my students. So could you maybe just like talk through what scoop is in a fingerboard?
Yeah, it's difficult to describe verbally. It's nice when you can just show it to someone. But the scoop refers to the curvature that goes from the nut to the bridge end of the fingerboard. So if you imagine there's the crosswise curvature, and then down the length of the fingerboard, there's another curve that's kind of more shallow, and that essentially just gives the string room to vibrate.
It's one of those things that like I try to describe it to a student, or even if I show it to them, just the concept can be kind of confusing.
It is. It's never easy to describe these things verbally or describe them at all. So it's a big problem. So yeah, scoop refers to that lengthwise curvature. Another name for it is relief or camber. Those are other words you might hear to describe it. And that's, you put that in so that the strings have room to vibrate. And if you want lower action, generally speaking, you want a little bit more scoop. If you're okay with higher action, you don't need as much scoop. That's kind of about it.
Okay, cool. And then there were a couple other terms in your article, and I thought it was really interesting reading through that. And love one is compound curvature, I think could you maybe just like talk through what that is, or that concept? Because that's kind of what the article's about.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great place to start, actually. So the scoop is that lengthwise curvature we talked about. I didn't really discuss that in the article. Instead, what I talked about was the crosswise curvature, which is like the side-to-side curve. So if you think about the nut, if you think about the curvature going from the G string over to the E string, like that curvature, that's what I'm talking about in this article. So when I say compound radius or compound curvature, what I mean is that the degree of curvature at the bridge end is going to be different than the degree of curvature at the nut end. So the curvature, if you can imagine, is going to be warping as it approaches the nut, as opposed to staying the same radius the whole length of the fingerboard, which is kind of the more traditional approach.
And so does this allow for like lower action with, I mean, what we all aspire for probably is like as low an action as we can without any buzzing. I mean,
exactly, right? Yeah.
And it's a different thing for a rockabilly player, obviously, or someone playing like solo Bach and thumb position all the time. But that's the goal, right? That I'm assuming we're all trying to get to.
Of course, yeah. And I'll make a point of saying this article is really geared towards arco playing. I'm still kind of wrapping my head around the ideal jazz fingerboard. So what I'm describing in the article is really geared towards the bow and how to optimize it for the bow. So the problem that I'm trying to fix or trying to describe in the article is when you're bowing the string is vibrating in an elliptical path that is in the same plane as the bow. And we want the plane of the fingerboard to be matching. This is hard to describe verbally. You want the fingerboard, the string, and the bow to all be going in the same direction. Otherwise, you end up with interference. And so that's what I see a lot is the curvature at the bridge end will be good. It'll match what's going on with the bow pretty well. But as you go towards the nut, it flattens out. And when I have those kinds of fingerboards, what I see a lot is that the G string will be prone to hitting the fingerboard kind of around the middle of the fingerboard or perhaps even closer to the nut, kind of on the outside of the string. And that's a pretty tricky problem to deal with, unfortunately, when you come across it.
Yeah, so that makes sense. I can. That's exactly what was happening with my bass when I took it in. Right, the fingerboard as it went down, you could just see that the ellipse was just colliding with the fingerboard, and like you're describing, like it was. And I think this is common for a lot of people's basses, especially student basses, like first position. Right, I'm trying to play like an A natural in first position, forte with the bow, big buzz. Right, yeah. So the and obviously it's different for every bass, but I know you've had experience with probably hundreds of setups at this point. So like the one of the more common problems is just that radius is not is too, or it's too flat as you go down towards the first position.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Okay,
that's exactly right. And again, that kind of comes from tradition. So if you consult the violin literature on setup work, which there isn't a lot, but the way you're instructed to do it is to maintain the same radius throughout the length of the fingerboard. And I think it works fine for violin because it's smaller. I don't think the problem is as amplified. But bass, when you compare the string heights that people want on bass versus the string heights that people are okay with on violin, bass is kind of an extreme setup. Even a moderate action is kind of on the low side when you compare it to how much clearance that you have on violin. So all that kind of makes the problem more prominent. So I really think basses and cellos in particular, paying more attention to this area of the fingerboard is going to improve people's setups.
And I think it makes sense if anybody thinks about it, because the violin, just the amount of force required to put the string down onto the fingerboard, it's just going to be less, right? Because the strings. So, am I describing it right? Like if yeah.
Yeah, you're exactly right. So that part of it is just the amount of weight that you need to put into the string to excite it isn't very much on violin. So you're not deflecting the string down into the fingerboard that much. On bass, especially when you're trying to get a nice sharp pop at the beginning of the note or something like that, you're going to be deflecting the string quite a bit. So that's actually reducing the amount of string height that you have, at least temporarily, and giving you less clearance for the string to vibrate. So the behavior of the bass strings when they're in motion, I think, is just a lot more chaotic than it is on violin. With the bow for sure, but also pizzicato. I mean, when you let go of them, they're kind of doing their own thing for sure.
Yeah, I'm sure. And you mentioned that you were still kind of trying to wrap your brain around the ideal jazz setup. But like, what are maybe some of the characteristics? Like, I play mostly arco, but like if someone came to you and was playing mostly, and there's so many different kinds of pizzicato playing, but let's just say someone playing mostly jazz with an amp, how might the fingerboard setup differ between those two?
It may be exactly the same. I do a lot of sort of what I'm calling an arco type setup for jazz players, and they seem pretty happy with it. So I don't know that it needs to be that different. I don't think the relationship between the curvatures at the bridge and the nut end are quite as important on a jazz setup. And the reason why I say that is when you're bowing the string, that string is moving in an elliptical path that's related to the direction of the bow. When you pitch the string, though, it doesn't have the bow to regulate which direction, so it's kind of going in a more circular path. So I think that relationship between the angle of the fingerboard and the direction of playing isn't as important. What is important, though, is the amount of scoop and the quality of the scoop. I find for Pitts playing that has a much bigger effect than it does for arco playing. So particularly a player who wants a nice growly sound, the amount of scoop that you have in the fingerboard is very important, and it's also very important that scoop be executed very well so that it's as smooth and as continuous a surface as possible. And that's what's going to give you a nice amount of growl on the notes.
Okay, got it. A common problem, and you describe this in the article, and I've seen it too, is like a student comes in with a bass, like a student level bass, and that fingerboard is flat and thin, and you are really boxed in as a setup person, right, in terms of what you can do if you have a really thin board, I'm assuming.
Yeah, it sucks. I have this problem all the time. All the laminated kind of rental level basses they tend to have this problem. It just sucks. That's part of why I wrote the article. I wanted to provide more resources for people to know. Like I said, when you consult the published literature on violin family setup work, there isn't a lot to begin with, but the little bit that there is for bass is terrible. I mean, there's one book that has bass fingerboard templates in it, and they're just awful. And I hate to think, how many well-intentioned people have, made new fingerboards for basses based on that information just because that's all they had. So I think that's a big part of it is the people making those types of instruments maybe don't have the best information. They may think they're doing it exactly the way they should be, but the makers aren't the ones setting them up. They're not the ones renting them out or selling them to people. They're not the ones dealing with the problems they have. They're not teaching the students how to play on those basses. So there's a bit of I don't know how to describe it. There just isn't good feedback. And then the other problem, I think, comes down to working methods. So I know at least one company, they're using, I think, a lathe type device to shape their fingerboards. And this might be hard to conceptualize, but when you use a lathe when you fit a fingerboard onto a big lathe, it's going to naturally create a mono radius fingerboard just because of the way it works. And so they would have to retrain their staff, retool, re-equip, which is kind of a big investment. I think there's some inertia in the manufacturing process, and then I also think there's just bad information to begin with, and that's why you see those things. And then as far as the thinness of the fingerboard, that kind of comes down to economy. Ebony is pretty expensive and it's pretty scarce at this point. So if they can get 2 fingerboards out of a piece of wood instead of 1, they're going to do that. That's just reality.
But if you had advice to give the makers, because like you said, they're not the people that are making these, especially student level instruments, they're not the ones that are setting them up, right? In the shop setting them up. You can do things if the fingerboard's thicker, right? If the fingerboard's
exactly.
Thin,
that would be the thing I say is like, I don't care how you shape it, just leave it thicker, and then the people stateside can set it up the way they want to. But if there isn't enough meat to work with, then you're kind of screwed.
Okay, I will help to spread that word any way I can, because that's
okay. Great.
And I'm struggling with this right now with a student. Her fingerboard's it's too thin, and it's just not, and it's tough because it's like, well, that's a big investment to get a new fingerboard on it.
It is.
Yeah,
it is, and a lot of bases aren't really worth it. Frankly, and then it's a big investment. Sometimes it's just as much as the base cost to replace the fingerboard, and it's kind of frustrating. But at the same time, it's the kids who need good setups the most who are having to navigate these instruments. So it's a pretty frustrating problem. I don't know the best solution for it, but if these bases would come with thicker fingerboards, then I would be happy. That would make me happy. So anyway.
Okay, cool. And Joey, I love this article. I'll link out to it. It helps spread the word. And there's one more, there's a line in here that I just want to highlight, and people should go and read this and check out the images. But I love I think you wrote, I have it here. So I can say it's, the fingerboard is where the player and instrument meet or interface with each other. And I love that concept. That's can you maybe just talk about that concept a little bit?
Okay, sure. Yeah, that's kind of meta.
I know. I like the meta.
Well, really, your right hand is interacting with the bow, which is indirectly sort of meeting with the strings. But your left hand, it's really the fingerboard. That's where you're contacting the bass. The strings too, but if you didn't have the fingerboard, then you wouldn't have anything to press against. So the fingerboard defines the way you experience the strings, if that makes sense. And then so a lot of the proprioception that's involved with playing in tune, I think really comes down to being keenly aware intuitively of how your fingerboard is shaped. And I think if you have a well-shaped fingerboard, you can adapt to it more easily than a really weird, wonky one. Part of the reason why I wanted to make that comment is if you have a good fingerboard, you can set everything else up perfectly to it, and you'll have a great playing bass. If you have a terrible fingerboard, you can have an amazing nut, you can have an amazing bridge, and it won't matter. The bass is still going to suck.
Yeah. I love that. It reminds me of the line, happy wife, happy life. It's like happy fingerboard, happy bass. Joey, this is great. This is fantastic. Is there anything else you want to get out there? And I love talking to people multiple times. So if you put out something else or you got something coming up, let me know. I always love hopping on Skype and chatting with people and getting the word out. Anything else you want me to get out there to folks about fingerboards or what you're up to or anything in general?
Well, I just want to, have players be aware that the makers competition is going to be going on at ISB, and the Wednesday after the results are announced, all the competition bases are going to be played on by the tone judges in a hall, and I invite as many players to come check that out. This is that's an exciting moment for all the luthiers there, and I think it'd be really cool if more players could get involved with that too. So fingers crossed, I should have a bass in there, and then there's going to be a lot of other great makers there as well. So I think that'll be a cool thing to check out. Cool.
Well, I will let you get back to what I'm sure is a busy schedule of getting ready for that and everything else. But I'm looking forward to seeing you there and checking out that event.
Fantastic.
Thanks, Joey, for the great chat. And folks, check out the article and everything else that Joey's up to at his website, which is joeynagerbases.com. And he's going to be at the ISB convention. I can't wait to see him in person there. And I can't wait to see you in person there if you are one of the 1,400, 1,500 people that are going to this event. So let me know if you are. Feedback@contrabaseconversations.com. Send me a message, or Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, Instagram, whatever. I'm on all of those social networks, so you can find me there. And you can find links to all of those at contrabaseconversations.com, our website. Thank you so much for hanging out for this week of all ISB coverage. I am pumped. I hope you are. There's going to be a lot of live coverage at the event. So even if you can't make it, and I know a lot of you can't, I will do my best to bring the spirit and essence and interest of this event to you. But if you can make it, I hope to see you there. All right, that's going to do it for today's episode. We have more ISB coverage coming soon on this podcast, where we cover life on the low end of the spectrum.